Now, one of the things that you pointed out, I saw it on CNN, and I think you should get a medal for this. Um, you criticized the Democratic National Committee for attacking Governor Asa Hutchinson, who meets the standards that we think about when we reflect on John Kennedy and profiles in courage. Knew he was not going to be the Republican nominee, but a two-term governor, deputy Homeland Secretary, head of the DEA, serious person, accomplished person, um, trudged it out for the sake of telling the truth and putting it into the record. And he's mocked, disparaged by what should be the hub of a political opposition, right, that nobody disputes should be anchored by the Democratic Party. We live in a two-party system. One of them is gone, but needs more people than its base in order to defeat Trump. And so when you look at the situation electorally as someone who's politically homeless, do you feel disdain from the left, we don't want you as part of the coalition? Does that worry you? Does it worry you in terms of, how they talk about, other parts of the country, people in it, and one of the things I was saying to someone, the other day about some of the issues, around the Democratic Party, and its incapacities to reach, certain elements of the electorate. I started getting a lecture on what other people's economic interests were, and I just said to them, how many welders and plumbers and pipe fitters do you think work at the Democratic National Committee?
Mm-hmm.
Right, versus woke Ivy League millennials, who may be a bit out of touch with that working person in Ohio, dare I say. But when you look at the political field right now, and you contemplate catastrophe, with 10 months to go, what is it that you see? And specifically, I want to ask, is there anybody off camera at CNN that you talk to who's bullish on Biden winning this election?
Great question. I mean, first off, there are those that are bullish on Biden, and they can make a good point, which is, once Trump's the nominee, people will be reminded about how insane he is. Like maybe there's something to it. I don't know. On your bigger question, look, I'll say this. I have noticed the Democrats are far better at controlling their crazies. And by the way, there are crazies. Like, all you have to look at is like Hamas sympathizers. And that to me is unbelievable. But the Republican Party has Russian sympathizers right now. I mean, for God's sakes, and there's almost Hamas sympathy there too, because
Who
they're
are
all
running
like,
who are running the party, right?
right, yes, and that's the difference.
How many
And
how many nuts do you think are in? How many people do you put in the Democratic Party nut basket? Right? What's the count? Right? Is it what is it? 12 people?
yeah, I'd say that's in Congress, yeah. I'd
12.
say it's your Ilhan Omar's and Rashida Tlaib's, and you talk to Democrats and they don't like them either, and they don't necessarily condemn them publicly, right? Let's be clear, they kind of do what the Republicans did with Trump. Now, here's my warning, since we're doing the warning here. My warning is this. So, like what the DNC put out, it was a staff hit job, and it's leadership that the chief of staff to Joe Biden called Asa to apologize. Trump would never do that. That's leadership. My concern is that there's this temptation to say, okay, the Republicans and Donald Trump do this, we have to match that with this over here in the Democratic version of it. Look, and I understand it because that's the temptation. They're getting away with this. Screw them. We're going to do this. Now, let me give you a fair warning. It's not how you win a winning coalition, but we need to have one party that's mature. We need to have one party that still can fight tooth and nail, but can stay above the fray on some of this garbage. Now, that doesn't mean you don't attack Trump like he attacks you. You do. But like a guy who got a 0.5% in the primary, you're going to celebrate him exiting by making fun of him? That's dumb. And again, to Biden's credit, they reached out. So in terms of how do I feel in the party, look, I just did a book tour, and I'll tell you, my biggest fans are on the left, and I appreciate it. And I've realized I'm probably closer now to the Democrats on foreign policy because my party's so far gone. I've rethought a number of issues because you can kind of come out of that tribe. But it is going to be important to understand that this year is going to have to be an uneasy and a gross feeling coalition of people that don't agree on policy. I'm talking big stuff like abortion or whatever. You know, how many people have you heard, Steve, that say, yeah, you know, if you're pro-life, you're as big of a threat to this country as Donald Trump. Okay, I've heard people say that. That's not true. A significant part of the country is pro-life. I get it. We're all passionate about abortion issues. It's not an issue that really tunes me up, but whatever. But Donald Trump is an existential threat. And that's why we have to have this coalition. So fight Trump tooth and nail, but welcome people like politically homeless, disaffected Republicans, because that's how you're going to win. Otherwise, I'm going to tell you, the concern at the, you know, behind in the rooms at CNN about people that think Joe Biden's, you know, in trouble is he's just not showing the fight, the vigor. And, you know, a lot of these Republicans are still saying, like Governor Sununu just said, for God's sakes, like, I'm going to vote for Trump if he's the nominee. Oh, great. That's cool. Pritzker, my governor, said the other day, you know, there's no difference between Trump, Nikki Haley, and Ron DeSantis. It's just if you want, you know, lifts in your boots or you want high heels. Haha, funny. He's running for president in 28. He's playing to the base. But I'm going to tell you, a Nikki Haley Republican is not a threat to the country. A Trump Republican is, and we need to get that straight.
And it is a threat to the country, no doubt about it. But one of the things that people say, and this will be the last question before I turn it over to Lisa and bring the audience in, is that there's this talk that if Trump wins, that democracy goes away like the lights go off sometime, right, an instant afternoon on January 20th, 2025. And that's not what's going to happen. We have 94,000 elected governments in the United States. They all have lawyers. This is the most sophisticated society that has ever existed in all of recorded history. I'm not sure it's killable, but I also don't have a lack of imagination about the danger. But my question is, if he invokes the Insurrection Act, does the military regard that as a lawful order to send armor out of gates at bases into American cities? And what happens, because I'll be there, when there's 5,000 Americans in front of the gates where the tanks roll out?
Man, what you're asking is a serious question, and it's a serious concern. Now, how would I see that playing out? Trump invokes the Insurrection Act. Inevitably, he's not just going to invoke it to invoke it. He'll have some false flag or, you know, something, some riot in some city that'll allow him to do it. And he could do it for any reason, really. I mean, it's a unique power the president has. I don't think the military would disobey that order because, you know, there's a lot of talk about, you know, the military swears an allegiance to the Constitution, not to the president, which is true. And for 200 some years, that's actually been a huge point of pride. And I think it's a good thing. Don't get me wrong. But the problem is commitment to the Constitution is up for debate. Like, what is that? So imagine Trump gives an order, and imagine you have a commander that disobeys that order. And then what does Trump do? He can relieve the commander and find somebody that believes that they're following the Constitution. And then every private or specialist will have to make a decision. Do they want to go AWOL? And they won't. Now, would they fire on American citizens? I don't think so. I mean, the Chinese military struggled to fire at Tiananmen Square. So I don't think you'll see that. But in terms of deployment, show of force, things like that, what happens if, let's say this, just completely false scenario, but hopefully, let's say Donald Trump loses the election and somehow then declares himself the winner. Let's say he'd have done this in 2020 because he would have had the power of the presidency. The Supreme Court could shoot him down and say, no, you're not the president. He refuses to leave the White House, say. Donald Trump could go on the air and say to every member serving in the military, you need to disobey your commanders if they're stopping you. You made a commitment to the Constitution. The Constitution declares that I'm legally elected. You are on my side. Or conversely, if Donald Trump is running and loses and claims it was a false election, I could see him getting on TV and telling the military, the election's being stolen from me. You need to disobey orders. You need to defect. You need to come over to our side. Is it crazy? Kind of. Is it realistic? It is, sadly. And that's a concern I have. The military is only as good as the people in it. And people are being convinced that the Constitution is something that it's not, or it's not something that it is. And so, yeah, take it seriously. And, I worry about that.
Do you think that J.B. Pritzker or Gavin Newsom have the spine and wherewithal to operate in a situation like that? For example, the president federalizes Illinois National Guard troops. The governor of the state says, belay that to his adjutant general. It's an illegal and unconstitutional order. And in fact, if federal troops come into Illinois, arrest them.
Yeah, I mean, you could see something like that happening in that kind of a scenario. And in theory, the National Guard, once it's federalized, if they disobey the order to be federalized, and now they're technically in violation of the Constitution or the commander in chief. And you're now in essence open rebellion at that point. So I don't know how that goes, but it's unique. I mean, keep in mind and I'm a National Guardsman, the entire Guard is funded by the federal government. So it's a militia, yes, but it's a militia that was never built to disobey the federal government. It was built to be under control, and I think rightly. But I could also see the president, for instance, federalizing blue or red states, depending on what that president is about. I mean, you saw this in the border when, Kristi Noem, who's a huge disappointment, sent her guard to the border because she's a red state, and literally only red states were going to the border. And to their discredit, blue states were choosing not to go to the border, which is also annoying. But yeah, you can start seeing the Guard playing the politics role. I just saw some tag or some leader of the National Guard in Alabama resigned because of the vaccine stuff. It's like, I really think he probably got a job at United Airlines and wanted to go out this way because he'll still get his pension. But that's the kind of crap we're going to start seeing.